authority.
This is the currency of the resistance. What is Bitcoin?
On our journey to the moon from the Genesis block, we've just passed an all-time high in Bitcoin. It's at nearly $1 trillion in market cap. It's nearly $20,000 as we begin 2018. It is the when Lambo crowd who shows up. They've seen people handed 10x, 5x, 20x returns across 2017. And again, cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin necessarily, looks like magic internet money that makes you wealthy, and when Lambo.
A lot of people all over the world were descending on crypto conferences, currency conferences, particularly ones that when we first started going in 2011, we might see 10, 20 people at a conference. Here, 4,000, 5,000 people are showing up at these mega conferences, and people are coming up on stage and pitching ICOs, you know, dozens of them on stage, one after another.
Like Bitcoin Miami, which is held in January 2018. There were Lambos parked out front, and people assumed you just had to pay the $2,000, show up at the Bitcoin conference, and when's my Lambo come? That's all you have to do. There's no hard work. There's no proof of work. There's no need to go through all the trial and tribulations and understand Bitcoin. It is literally just buy whatever ICO is being offered, and you too become rich.
When Lambo.
Sorry?
When Lambo.
What's that mean?
Okay, let's move on.
When Lambo, I think there's always going to be silly people. I don't think that has anything to do with anything. I think you always have silly people. I think some of this stuff with When Lambos and all this other stuff are parts of an old world that will die away too. So as we draw people to the spirit of what we've been doing and creating in the space of Bitcoin, I think that activity has a shelf life. It's not the long term. That's the here and now. Like, when we got involved, and again, Max was so helpful in showing us the way. We didn't look at it as how much was Bitcoin worth. We looked at the fact that we had a new way of doing transactions, how we can interact with each other. He spoke about a way that we no longer would be limited or controlled by people who never respected us anyway. So I think some of the leftovers of or residuals of this current environment is kind of spilled over into this new world that we're creating, but that's gonna go away also.
2018 continues the ICO boom. In fact, more money was raised in 2018 than the epic amounts raised in 2017. In the first 3 months of the year, a total of $6.3 billion is raised in ICOs. Q1 saw 59% as many ICOs raise capital as all of 2017. By September 2018, there was over $13 billion raised for initial coin offerings. These are genuinely magic internet money. It's just fabricated out of thin air.
Sure, because the market was beginning to deflate, but people were not believing that the bull market might be over, so they were buying into it still quite aggressively. And that's always the case, isn't it? When these bull markets start to roll over, the first 10, 20% drop is usually met with skepticism. It's just a little bit of a pause, and we'll be right back to new highs shortly. And money kept piling in, of course, and seemed cheap. If you liked it at $20,000, you're going to love it at $16,000.
There were, by this time in 2018, 146 crypto hedge funds. They exploded onto the scene in 2018. This compares to, in 2012, there were just 9 crypto-based hedge funds.
The correction in 2018 was in part due to the fact that we started to actually financialize Bitcoin in a negative way. We started to have coin lending that wasn't backed by the actual coins. We started to see rehypothecation come into Bitcoin, and we haven't even seen the big Wall Street money yet. We've just seen Wall Street money from hedge funds on the edges, but wait till the big Wall Street money comes in, then it's actually going to be even more price suppressed. And the price suppression comes from the fact that there are folks that are accepting a Bitcoin IOU as if it's the real thing. When we store our Bitcoin at an exchange, what we own is not Bitcoin, it's a Bitcoin IOU, and we have no idea whether the exchange has promised more of those than they actually have in their reserves. But all that said, I think in the long run, though, all of these firms who are playing this three-card Monte game with Bitcoin will end up being wrecked in the next bear market.
Sure, the crypto hedge fund is a beast, again, from Wall Street, and they generally show up late stage in the cycle, and there's a lot of activity, and a lot of easy money can be raised, and a lot of bad bets can be made, and a lot of tears can be shed. And it all happens quite quickly. And the evidence of this would be found in the Lambo dealers marketing directly to crypto holders. You know, they would... I would fully expect at that point Lamborghini to come out with a model expressly for Bitcoiners. You know, that's how much of a speculation that this was driving into the Lamborghini market. And, you know, when you have the shots on the news of Lamborghini dealers talking about the latest investment craze, that's generally the top. I remember in the 87 stock market top, they had a lot of reports of Porsche dealers getting a lot of orders from the instant wealthy yuppies and 20-somethings on Wall Street, of which I was one of them, and that was the top of that market.
Most people join during a bubble cycle when our industry is slammed and everyone's trying to onboard people into this new thing. And then shortly after, we get a crash, and we've always seen in Bitcoin typically an 80 to 90% correction in some cases. But eventually that drives out all the fraud and all the people that weren't meant to be here, and we focus on building and making better technology and better solutions and better ways of onboarding. And that eventually leads to another bull market, and in Bitcoin's history, it's always gone to new highs.
So you were also around during the dot-com bubble and burst. And during that time, what a lot of ordinary companies did in order to attract that hysterical capital was they added .com to their name. Whatever the company was, they would just add .com. Here we're seeing at the same time companies starting to add blockchain to their name. Long Island iced tea company adds blockchain to their name. And what happens, of course, at the same time, the price of their stock does soar on the news of them adding blockchain to their name. Here's a crazy story from the financial press. How people are like literally, there's a mental breakdown here. Commodities expert, Bitcoin is nonsense and I'll never buy any. 2 months later, I bought stock in a fake blockchain company that was exposed as a fraud and dropped 33% in a single day. That was Jameson Lopp tweeting about Dennis Gartman. Dennis Gartman is a very well-known guy on Wall Street. He writes the Gartman newsletter. Lots of big banks here on Wall Street buy his newsletter for his expertise on commodities. He was on CNBC 2 months ago dissing hard how Bitcoin is nonsense and I'll never buy any. Well, apparently he had to inform his investors that he's basically made a disastrous bet and lost big time on Riot blockchain. Remember this? It was like a biotech company that suddenly out of the blue changed their name to a Riot blockchain, and that they were going to become a blockchain company instead, and their share price like soared. January 2018, we saw Blockstream launched a payment processing system with retailers. Blockstream also noted that Lightning was live on mainnet with 60 nodes operating as of January 18th, 2018, and should be considered in testing.
Lightning is a way to move Bitcoins very, very quickly. It's for payments. So you can essentially spend your Bitcoin instantly and with very minimal fees. And it's the key to opening up a circular economy where people can start earning and spending fluidly.
So Lightning Network is this new layer that has been built on top of Bitcoin. It's actually very similar to the layers that comprise the internet itself, where the base layer of the internet is this global flooding broadcast mechanism, which would never be able to scale to the levels that we see today with the internet. So instead, the way that the internet was scaled was by building other layers on top that make it more efficient, specifically layers that allow you to route data so that it's going through a minimal number of nodes on that network to reach its final destination. Lightning Network works in the same way, where we are anchoring into Bitcoin, the blockchain as the base layer, but then building routable networks on top of it, so that if you want to send a payment to someone on Lightning, instead of having to broadcast to the entire network like you do with Bitcoin on the main blockchain, instead you are only talking to a few nodes and really finding the shortest path to get to your final destination node that you're trying to pay.
Every time you're broadcasting your transaction to the Bitcoin network, you're talking to everyone. It's like if you want to go out, you're calling every single friend and saying, I'm going out now. But with Lightning, you're only talking to who you need to talk to. When you're going to buy a coffee, you're paying the person you want to pay in a channel, routing through a few other parties, but it's just that one channel, not to the entire network.
The way we look at this is that, right, everybody collateralizing their Apple shares or, you know, their stock or their gold purchase in India in Bitcoin is going to drive massive amounts of transactions onto the Bitcoin blockchain. And if 1 billion people were going to try to do this next month, the system would collapse. It's just Bitcoin couldn't handle it. Now, what's great about what you were talking about Lightning is that it provides a scalability layer that levels the playing field for access, right? Because Bitcoin wasn't really designed to be a universal payment layer that everybody could just publish their $10 transaction onto. It can't handle it, right? Bitcoin is actually very inefficient, but it was designed to be decentralized, not efficient. That's the price of decentralization. Lightning actually adds a layer of efficiency on top that's not decentralized per se, but in theory is almost as secure and allows us to publish a $10 Apple share purchase using Bitcoin, for example. And so we need that level of innovation to make this scale to billions of people, and that's why I'm super excited about some of these new technologies coming out.
Hawaii, a paradise with summer all year round, turned into a round-the-year experimentation field for agricultural chemicals.
We know that these chemicals have consequences. They are major irritants, there's no question. Otherwise, why would the chemical company workers themselves be geared up and suited up?
Locals attempt to combat the unregulated experiments, but often in vain.
You have many of these people who have one foot into the biotech pharma and the other foot in the government regulatory bodies. This kind of collusion is reprehensible.
While the battle goes on, the chemicals continue to poison Hawaii and its people.
So one has to ask the question whether there is a form of environmental racism going on in Hawaii, whether these companies feel they can get away with this because the people have less political power.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, where would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q. Larry.
Question more.
What did you do before you came here? Where did you work before you came here? Where did you live? Well, death row.
In many U.S. states, capital punishment is still practiced. Convicted prisoners can spend years waiting for execution.
Most of the time, the victims' families, they are very much in favor of the death penalty. There are some people that, because of what they did, have given up the right to live among us.
Some are even proven innocent after years on death row.
How many more exonerations is it going to take before we as a society realize that this is not working and we actually do something about it?
So Lightning Network solves the scalability issue. This is solved by slow builders who are building a solid foundation for the entire ecosystem of Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself is layer one. Layer one needed to be secure, safe, and solid. Increasing the block size would have made it less safe than had we increased the block size. Now that the Civil War is over, Lightning Network can happen. It could build layer two upon layer one, just like our global system around us, which is built upon gold, which is layer one of the global financial system.
Good analogy. I mean, that's exactly right. So you have the basic foundation of Bitcoin, which is solid and proven to be solid with 99.999% uptime. And now we have layer two. So transactions that are tied to Bitcoin, and Lightning is a good example of that. And Lightning looks like it's a winner.
On March 15, 2018, Lightning Labs CEO Elizabeth Stark announced the initial release of LND 0.4-beta for developers with the intent of making it available for testing purposes on the main Bitcoin network.
Prior to even Bitcoin, I'd always wondered, why can't you easily just send money to people on the internet? Why is it so difficult, if I hear a song I like, to just give that person, say, $1, or read an article or a blog post or watch a video? Why is there not this native way to send value and money on the internet? And as I'm sure many of you know, the early, the creators of the web envisioned in the early 90s that there would be this native value and payment layer for the internet. We had the HTTP 402 error code, but it never came to fruition back then. And we had things like Chaumian eCash, and there were a variety of potential proposals, but at the end of the day, they were centralized. And of course, as we know, with centralization comes all sorts of negative implications. So when I first learned about Bitcoin, I thought, wow, okay, here's finally this way for people to natively transact, to finally, to credit Andreas, have the internet of money. But of course, it turns out, the decentralized nature means that if you can have 5 to 10 transactions per second because you want to maintain that decentralization, well, that's not going to enable people to transact instantly and natively. So much like the layered architecture of the internet, the idea that Bitcoin would have this layered architecture made a lot of sense to me in kind of knowing about the way that the internet evolved. So thinking about this transaction layer for Bitcoin and this native way to transact, why is it so easy right now for me to send a photo in any app, this interoperable standard? Why don't we have this interoperable standard for money and value? And that's really what I see Lightning as.
So this is when the term reckless came around, because it was very much like the very, very early days of Bitcoin, especially the 2009 and 10, when there were all sorts of bugs being found, 184 billion Bitcoin printed. It's experimental.
There is a caution in the Bitcoin world that people don't want to, for good reasons, cause people to lose money, right? And so there was this sort of rebellion movement against that called the reckless meme that came up on Twitter, and we've kind of been on the reckless side as well. Not always encouraging customers, but at least taking risks ourselves. And I think that from a company standpoint, the really reckless thing is not exposing your product to customers, so that maybe you'll spend a bunch of money building something that nobody wants.
Oh, right. Well, the culture of technology in America comes out of the aerospace business to a large degree, and that gave us the test pilots and the astronauts and men landing on the moon. The builders of this CERN particle accelerator in Switzerland, some would argue, are being slightly reckless because they could, in fact, create a black hole in Switzerland that will gobble up all of our known reality, right? That seems reckless to me, and yet they go ahead and do it because that's what we need to get to the next state of our consciousness and our global consciousness and our collective unconsciousness, of which Bitcoin is the native currency of our collective unconscious.
Our collective unconscious is also found on Twitter, where we all sputter and spout our words. And I bring that up because Jack Dorsey in March of 2018 is revealed as investing in Lightning Labs, Elizabeth Stark's company. He mentions Lightning and that he likes it. And so you're getting those visionaries, those thinkers, those more of the Silicon Valley big ideas guy starting to say, and Jack Dorsey himself says it on stage at Consensus, that Bitcoin is the money for the internet, and that is the future. So from April 2018 to August 2018, the Bitcoin Lightning Network had a monthly growth rate of 15%. The number of nodes increased from 1,500 to 3,000, and the number of channels increased from 4,000 to 11,000.
We are seeing now the transition from Bitcoin as a unit of account to the Satoshi. So as Bitcoin gets to 100,000, $1 million, $10 million per Bitcoin, people are going to be referring to the Satoshi, which is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin.
In terms of the second layer and the importance of that to Bitcoin as a unit of account, I think it's quite interesting that Brad Sherman this week actually said Bitcoin threatens the US dollar as a unit of account. And I mean, if you know how we ended up with the fiat system riding on top of gold, you know, the credit system and all of that stuff was built as a second layer essentially on gold. And yet that second layer system whereby, you know, gold is stored in Fort Knox and, you know, the Bank of England, that the nodes, those are the nodes in the gold system that allowed this global trade to emerge, but it was always subject to cheating because it's a centralized ledger. So now we have a decentralized ledger, Lightning, and now Bitcoin, because of Lightning and the stuff that will follow, it does allow Bitcoin to threaten the US dollar as a unit of account.
I like to say, you know, Bitcoin is the millennial retirement account, right? Like a lot of my friends, it's like, no, they don't necessarily have the traditional means. They don't trust the traditional financial system, and there's a good reason for that. And it's not just generational, but, you know, a lot of us in the wake of, say, you know, 2008, and we don't trust these institutions, and we no longer have faith in systems that previously, you know, people put a lot of faith into. And so, you know, am I going to trust something that is backed by, you know, a global, you know, decentralized community and system that is not dependent upon any one nation state? Or am I going to back something, you know, that, you know, in the past, you know, had a lot of issues and may in the future, you know, fail in a variety of ways? Like, I'm going to put my faith in the global decentralized technology at the end of the day, right?
When gold was used as money, people were able to hold on to a store of value and think about the long term, think about the future, and that in turn led to a much better way in which humans cooperated with one another, lived in peace with one another, were more creative, were more productive, accumulated capital, got richer, and whereas you see the opposite happen in periods where money is destroyed, because when money is destroyed, you know, money is not expected to hold on to its value. So people don't save much for the future. They don't think much of the future. They start thinking more and more of the day-to-day existence. And their entire focus in their economic decision-making, whether it's personal or with others, shifts towards the short term more and more. And that leads to more conflict and leads to, you know, short-termism, capital consumption, and increase in consumption, drop in investment and in saving, and essentially a degradation of the economic situation, but also all aspects of individual life in terms of people's focus on the short run versus the long run. And so Bitcoin is an astonishing achievement for me because it's an online technology that is essentially open for everyone around the world to access, that allows them to use the hardest money ever invented, and therefore allows everyone to shift their time preference in accordance with this money that is very hard to inflate, that acts as a great store of value, and that encourages people to shift towards long-term thinking, lower time preference orientation, more people being more cooperative and collaborative and peaceful with one another.
And so, you know, this is where the fight over gold and silver throughout the centuries and this pendulum swinging, it swung from the individual to the state and back and forth. Like, this is now the great battle of our time, and the battlefield is over Bitcoin. And we're going to see whether the right to money vests with the individual or with the state. We're going to see whether individuals have control over their own destiny and are able to make their own choices when it comes to exchange rates, or whether that is going to be with political elites that can then siphon off through seigniorage, expropriate, confiscation through inflation, which is a form of taxation without representation or due process of law. It becomes very binary with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now a technology that the individual can wield to enforce their individual rights when it comes to money and to resources.
So we get into the second half of 2018, well, in fact, the final quarter of 2018, and what happens in October of 2018, but Crypto Springs, my own Bitcoin conference, and Lightning Network with Lightning Labs, Elizabeth Stark and Meltem Demirors, and Amanda Fabiano of Fidelity Labs. And we invited the no-when Lambo crowd. There were no ICOs. By the way, the ICO market by this point had completely crashed. Bitcoin prices were continuing to fall. And this was a bear market. This was genuinely a bear market. We're down by over 80% in the Bitcoin price from the all-time high. And this is always a time, just like we covered back in 2013 and 14, this is a time for builders.
The cypherpunk movement of the first kind of incarnation leads to the decentralization movement, which is kind of the 2.0 in my mind, from what was about the individual movement. The 2.0 movement is about integrating the whole planet, right? Where the individual, you have a bunch of self-sovereigns who can function as a real global entity now in a decentralized model, and that's how you fight socialism, in my mind.
Yeah.
Right? Because now everybody's incentivized to grow the pie in a way that really integrates the physical world, the digital world, and a bunch of self-sovereigns, sorry to keep using the term, but in a way that's highly incentivizing.
If you look at how colonialism controlled the world, it was really through a financial system and full of these very parasitic transactions. With Bitcoin, we don't need any of these parasites. You and I can connect together and we can exchange whatever we want. We don't even need fiat. I can exchange my wonderfulness and you can compensate me with Bitcoin. I mean, come on, that's love, that's real.
It is the collective unconscious, which means that Bitcoin is everyone. It's the most purest expression of the collective unconscious. And by extending that out technologically to everyone on Earth who's got access to an open port, to telephone or an internet connection, you've got the makings of the truly interesting step change in our consciousness as human beings. I think that we're on the verge of a major quantum evolutionary leap enabled by Bitcoin. I often ask the question, why do you need 40, 50,000 quadrillion calculations per second to secure the blockchain? That's an awful lot of hashing power. That's an awful lot of computer power. Do you really need all that computer power? Who's really behind all this computer power? Where is this really going? Are we going to get to the point where every transaction ever conceived in the past and might ever occur in the future could be happening simultaneously? And what does that do to the concept of time and linear progress? And why are we not thinking about this in an even more profound and bigger way? Because it will, the end game, be a reveal that in fact we're just all one entity, where there is no separation between us. Our minds are of one. We are of one mind. And you can prove it on the blockchain. There's an open source record of the fact that we are of one mind. And time is a construct that we are manufacturing simply to better understand each other as an extraordinary act of love.
The blockchain is immutable, so you will never disappear from history now.
To the extent history still matters.